Hi there. We're back at User's Guide for the Soul. Wonderful to have everybody here. We're also going live on Facebook. So here we are on Facebook. Welcome to User's Guide for the Soul. I'm watching to check in if anyone has questions. And if you're wondering what those beautiful sounds are, it's our ECC back in swing. So it's wonderful to have young people in the building, and you can enjoy a little bit of their voices in the background as we are learning. But if you're joining me on Facebook, if you're with us, please make comments in the comment section. I'm following, and we'll bring your questions or comments into the class. We're learning the Tanya. It's a very, very lofty kabbalistic text that takes some of the deepest wisdoms of our mystical tradition and creates really a user's manual for how to live life at our most integrated, to live life at our highest functioning state. So where we're at, if you're just joining us, we've been learning all about how if you want to know the biggest reason why creation happened, why the world is here and you and I are on this journey, it is in order to create a home for God in the lowest realm. A home for God here in the physical world and in my physical being, and even in my egotistical being, which we call the animal soul. So we went through a whole 3-chapter series on why that is really the purpose of creation and the power of a mitzvah, that it allows me to be like a Merkava, like a chariot, just like the forefathers and foremothers. Now in 38, we're starting a section which is going to the other point of the spectrum, which is not the value of a physical mitzvah, which we still understand, that's a starting point, but also the value of what we're calling Kavanah. Kavanah. And let me remind people what Kavanah is. It's not, we're not talking about the basic, hi Joey, you'll want to mute if you can. We're not talking about Kavanah as in my basic intention that, pardon me, I'm closing a few things here. We're not talking about Kavanah as my basic intention that I'm doing a mitzvah with awareness. Because you could say you're doing with Kavanah, meaning, I'm saying the blessing after meals, but I'm not doing it while I'm thinking about taxes or something else. And just 10 minutes later, I'm thinking, did I say it? I don't remember. It just kind of happened. I'm used to it. I did it on automatic. That's actually, for a lot of times, if you do it without any awareness or any intention of doing a mitzvah, now actually you may have to do it again. But we're talking about, you're aware you're doing a mitzvah. You're aware you're doing it because you're Jewish and it creates value. But am I doing it just because I have to and get through it? Or am I doing it with a tremendous sense of, I love being attached to the infinite through this mitzvah. I have a sense of respect that there's a way that Judaism wants this mitzvah done. And whatever my format of doing that, I'm sticking to it with a sense of respect or awe. Those two emotions are what we're calling kavanah and can be deeper and deeper and more powerful. And as we'll see, they elevate the mitzvah to various spiritual worlds, which comes later on in the section. So I want to go over, before we start in the chapter, I want to go over a basic model we introduced last week. Let me share my screen so as you can see where we are. And then we'll also have one more piece that I'd like to add when we get to it today, which I believe we will. So he talked about mitzvah and kavanah. The difference between them being, when you do a physical mitzvah, God's essence, the inner point of God's will, is not hidden in any way. Whereas with most of the physical world, it is actually concealed that God is creating it, that God wants it here. You look at the world, you see a mask that I had coming in here. You see a table, you see a tree, and you think it's just mask, table, or tree. You don't see God's will. God's will is hidden completely. However, with a mitzvah, it's the opposite. God's will is completely transparent. When you look at a Tanya book, you say, oh, that's there for me to learn Torah. When you look at the Torahs in my ark back here, you see, that's God's will, to learn about God, to learn about Judaism. It's transparent, but still I'm looking at a physical thing, right? There's not a lot of spiritual light necessarily. Where that comes in is in my kavanah. Because when I read from the Torah with devotion and passion, now there's a certain light that we all know is coming in, and that's what we're calling shining light versus revealing God's essence.
I'm busy, Anna.
So every mitzvah reveals God's essence. However, it's the Kavanah that shines the light. So if I were to compare it to a doorway, as long as I have some glass in the door and I can see through, I know it's on the other side. It's revealed to me. So I may be looking through a peephole, as I said. I know it's there, but not a lot of light comes through the peephole. Whereas if I look through a slightly larger door, now I still see what's on the other side, just as revealed, yet more light comes in. And with even higher kavanah, now perhaps it's a window where the sun is really streaming in. And finally, we looked at windows all around. It's as if I'm bathing in sunshine the whole time. In all these four situations, it's equally revealed to me, it's transparent, who's on the other side. I see the essence. I see God's will is what we're talking about. And yet, when my kavanah grows, now there's more and more light. So keep that in mind as we go through. We will come back to that. Now I want to go inside our text.
Cantor?
There you go.
Cantor?
Yes. Yes.
I was studying with Rabbi Meir of Pardes this week, and he said that the Tu B'Shvat Seder was started by the Kabbalists in Svat after the expulsion up from Spain, and they came back to Svat and wanted to show the appreciation of the gift of the land, and they wanted to reconnect and come back to where they needed to be. So I thought that was really
beautiful.
Nice to know.
Yeah. Very timely, yeah. And the same way we talked about, we'll learn about the four categories of created beings coming from the four letters of God's name. Those four cups, also are referring to the four worlds and the four letters of God's name. So beautiful. And Chag Sameach to everyone. Should be like a tree, have roots in the spiritual, and create fruit here in the physical world. Yeah, enjoy the holiday. Let me check if we have any comments in here. Let us know. Hi, everybody who's watching. So let's start in the Tanya. We're on page 540 at the top. And if anyone's watching who needs the text, just email Maya at temple-israel.org. V'lo shedvekut hamachashava v'sechel hadam bo yitbarech hi mitzad atzma lemala midvekut kiyum hamitzvot ma'asiyot b'foal mamash.
It's not the attachment of man's thought and intellect to God is intrinsically superior to attachment through the actual practical fulfillment of the mitzvot dependent on action.
All right, so why is it that Kavanah is considered superior in terms of revealing light? Because when it comes to attachment to God, the mitzvah already does it. You can't say that you're more attached through Kavanah than mitzvah, as we learned. So what is it that Kavanah brings, and why is it that it's considered a value? If the mitzvah already attaches me to God and it's done, what else is there? What does my Kavanah have to do with it? Okay, it feels good to have Kavanah. Emotions feel nice. Now I know I'm a spiritual person. Hooray for me. But where does the value come if the physical mitzvah that's the whole thing? Let's do 2. Ela mipnei shezehu gam ken ratzon yibarech ledavka b'sechel u'machashava v'kavanat hamitzvot masiyot u'v'chavanat kriyat shema u'tfila u'sha'ar brachot.
For as will be explained further on, the unity with God achieved by performance of mitzvot is described in the same terms as the unity of husband and wife, kiddushin, as we say in the blessing preceding the fulfillment of a mitzvah, God who sanctified us with his commandments. Rather, kavanah is superior because this too is God's will, that one attach himself to him by intellect and thought, and by the kavanah of the active mitzvot, and by one's kavanah during the recital of the Shema and in prayer and other blessings.
So where does the value of kavanah come? Not because it attaches me to God more than a mitzvah, right? A mitzvah, now I'm completely subsumed in God's will, not because it creates a home for God, that the mitzvah does, not even because now I've engaged my awe and my love to connect with God, because that's a little bit about me, but ultimately because that's also what God wants, right? Just like God wants a mitzvah, and that's creating a home for God, God also wants us to do the mitzvah with a sense of kavanah and attachment to God, and that's where the value comes from. The same thing. It's a beautiful twist if you see what it is, because often when we get into these spiritual paths, you can get caught back up in your animal soul and your ego, in look how much love I've created, look how much awe I've created, look how spiritual my mitzvahs are, look at what I'm going to get in the world to come, etc., etc. And suddenly, which soul is the one having the kavanah, right? Is it the animal soul having the kavanah? Because the animal soul is very spiritual too. Or is it the divine soul having the kavanah? So just like we did in many other points in the Tanya, where we flipped it and we said, ultimately, we're doing this only because we're giving God nachas, not because I'm improving myself, yes, but that elevating of my own animal soul is just to give God nachas, not because now I should feel better, right? Although I might be happy, but that's not the point. Same thing here. We do want to generate kavanah. It's important, and that will elevate my mitzvahs. But the true value of the kavanah itself is not because now I'm more attached to God or I'm more spiritual. The true value is because God wanted it. Does that make sense? I mean, it maybe sounds like a subtle point for someone just joining us, but very important to keep it in mind. So I have the divine soul still driving the show, even in this spiritual realm. People get what I mean? And I had some questions that I'd love to just touch on about meditation and the styles we're using, the systems we're using, vis-a-vis this point exactly. I got a question this week about how the point of Jewish meditation is to generate emotional flow in order to elevate the mitzvahs. That's the point. Whereas those of us who have meditated perhaps in modalities from the East, we recall or are familiar that the point of meditation in the East is often divorced from emotion completely. In fact, the ideal is to be detached from all phenomenological events, from the whole world, from even, to some extent, relationships, and to be detached completely and have just neutral emotion about everything is considered the highest state. And the point of meditation in the East, not Jewish, is to detach so much from the world that now I'm in the state of spiritual oneness, and I recognize that the world has no reality. It's an illusion. That's the East. Whereas in Judaism, when we meditate, the whole point is to create emotions and to create a proper attachment, to create the kind of attachment that will lead me to engage in the right way. And I think I compare it to, let me put it this way. In a relationship, you know, now we're in this quarantine in Michigan, and there's a lot of people we haven't seen, and perhaps you have grandkids or family you haven't seen, and if you finally, excuse me, if you finally get to see them, they finally arrive. It's that day. We all have vaccines, whatever it is, and then you get that big hug. I mean, if they walk in and they're amazed to see you and happy and smiling and laughing, and a big hug comes, that's it, right? Is there something more you need? And if they walk in and they sit down in a calm, detached way, and you don't sense a strong emotion, but they're really in this, you sense this spiritual plane where they're at one with the oneness because they spent COVID learning to meditate, quote unquote, you know, and they sit and you know, wow, they really have evolved and changed, but where's the smile? Where's the I love, you know, where's the look in the eye? Which in a relationship is going to be of more value? And although there is a lot of pleasure in sort of ending the ego as we do in Eastern meditation, when it's a relationship, that's not really what we're looking for, right? We want that connection. Once the emotion's there, the big hello, the big smile, the hug, that we love you, like what else do you need? And I'd add to it that often when something is functioning and healthy, you don't need to notice it in great detail. right? I mean, that applies to the body. When my body is healthy and functioning, please God, and I'm doing something that's important, say I'm a firefighter and I'm helping rescue someone, or I'm an artist and I'm painting something, or I'm a writer, I'm writing, whatever it might be. If my body's healthy, I'm probably not paying attention to my body. I'm just doing what I do. It's important to me. I'm engaged. It's only when my body has an issue, a problem, God forbid, then now I'm suddenly aware of it, right? If my shoulder or my liver or whatever. Now, when it's not functioning well, now I become acutely aware of it because it's telling me to pay attention. You might look at the soul the same way in terms of this question of meditation. A lot of Eastern meditation, and it's been a lot of hats have been hung on this in the past decades in North America, is focused on heightening my spiritual awareness to the point where I'm divorced from the physical world. I'm detached from it. And there's a lot of pleasure, as I said, in being acutely aware of the soul by sitting and ending the ego and emptying the mind and pushing myself to exist in that way, or to perceive in that way. But ultimately, Judaism says, well, if you're doing something that has deep value and your sense of love and awe are both engaged, your soul's also there. All that is happening. You just don't have to pay close attention to it. That's not the point of it. And you might even have a very spiritual experience, wonderful, and have pleasure in that. But again, that's not the point of why you're doing the mitzvah. You're doing the mitzvah because you have a relationship with God. You want to be close. You're engaged. You feel love. You feel awe. Guess what? Your soul is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's healthy. And whether you're having a highly spiritual experience because it's the high holidays and here we are, or whether you're having a very physical experience because you're building a sukkah and you got the wrong screws, now you had to drive back and bring it back, and then you get them in and it's cold and it's raining and you're in a rush. You may be having a very physical experience, but your soul is in the right place and your soul is engaged. So Jewish meditation is not there to detach us from the physical world. It is there to engage emotions, knowing that now the soul is aligned exactly the way it's supposed to. Any thoughts about that? That was a bit of a detour I wanted to take because I got some questions. So any discussion before we go back inside the text?
Yeah, I have one thought or one an example that someone gave me is that, when you think you're understanding and you just want to go to the top of a mountain and be one with God, Judaism says, no, you got to be out there in the real world and dealing with everything that's going on. You can't just isolate yourself.
Agreed. And I'm no expert in Eastern culture, but there is some sense that it can be pushed to the point, detachment can be pushed to the point where you say, well, people are in the world suffering because that's their karma, and it's not my job to interfere with karma. Which, God forbid, a Jew should walk by someone who's suffering and not think, the reason I'm here is to help, to change this suffering, right? So yeah, in Judaism, we're always right in the world, and nothing that we achieve spiritually is of value unless we now bring it back into the physical. That's the whole shape. Excellent. And the illumination. Rick, you'll want to unmute yourself, please. There you go.
Sorry about that. And the illumination of the supernal will that radiates and is clothed in the Kavanah. Should I go on?
Here, let me do it. Yeah, go on. Hi gdola leinket lamala mala meharat ratzon elyon hamira umlebeshet bekivun hamitzvot atzman b'maseh u'v'dibur b'li Kavanah.
Is
Go ahead, Rick.
infinitely greater and loftier than the illumination of the supernal will that radiates and is clothed in the performance of the mitzvah themselves, in action and speech, without Kavanah.
So the value of the Kavanah, as we said, is because God wants us to reach out and be close and have a relationship. God wants that. That's what gives the Kavanah value, not that I'm now more spiritual. However, since I'm doing that, the value, the illumination that comes is much greater than the physical mitzvah. Because if you look at, as I said, $1 in a tzedakah box, it's a physical thing, right? I mean, it's transparent to God's will, but there's not a lot of light. like there is in the heart of a young person who's learning for their bar mitzvah, and they're excited and they're connecting and they feel like they're now like their parents, right? I mean, there's a lot of light in that. So that's where the light comes through. That's where the window gets bigger and bigger and bigger, even though as long as you're doing mitzvah, you can see through, you know what's going on. כגודל מעלת אור הנשמה על הגוף שהוא כלי מלבוש הנשמה כמו גוף המצווה עצמה שהוא כלי ומלבוש לכוונתה.
This superiority of Kavanah is similar to the superiority of the light of the soul over the body, which is a vessel and garment for the soul, just as the body of the actual mitzvah is a vessel and garment for its Kavanah. For this reason, then, the performance of a mitzvah is likened to a body and its kavanah to a soul.
So that puts a cap, so to speak, on this first metaphor we're using, that doing a mitzvah without kavanah, yes, it's the ikar, it's the core of reality, it's why we're here, it creates a home for God, done. But if you do it without kavanah, if you just do it rote, that's like a body without a soul. And now now that we understand the value of a mitzvah, we want to now engage our kavanah and make sure every mitzvah we do has a soul. It can be quick, right? It can be, there's actually a practice when you're learning Torah that you say, I'm now learning Torah for the sake of uniting Kucha Brichu with its Shechina, right? And every hour, some scholars who learn for 8 hours a day, so they don't just go on to automatic. Every hour they'll stop and they'll say, for this next hour, I'm doing it for the sake of uniting God's, the midot and the Shechina, right? The kabbalistic unions that happen. Or if you do a mitzvah, in some Sephardic traditions, before you do any mitzvah, you say, I'm doing this for the sake of uniting Kucha Brichu with the Shechina. So sometimes it's as simple as just stating it out loud, that I'm doing this for my relationship to God, and that allows the kavanah to flow in, and it can happen very quickly. But whatever time you have, whatever amount of energy you can put in, the degree to which my emotions are engaged, that now is going to be the soul for all of my mitzvahs. And more than just knowing there's light coming, we're also helping the mitzvah, as we'll learn in the coming chapters, as we learned also in, 16, 17. We have the ability to elevate mitzvahs to various spiritual worlds, and the next few chapters get quite technical. I love them. I hope you will too. True, ve'af shebishtehen ba'mitzvah v'chavanata melubbash ratzon echad pashut b'tachlit hapshitut bli shum shinui v'ribui chas v'shalom michad b'mauto v'atzmuto yitbarech b'tachlit hayichud.
True, although both the actual mitzvah and its kavanah contain the same supernal will, which is perfectly simple, that is changeless and indivisible, God forbid, so that it cannot be said that kavanah contains more of God's will and performance, contains less, and this will be united with God's essence and being in perfect unity.
So, this point is being emphasized a few times. You can see it's important to the Alter Rebbe. In terms of the concealment of God's will, it's in mitzvah is the same. The physical mitzvah, the kavanah, if it's God's will, it's God's will. And you see it and it's transparent, and you can't say there's more in one place and less in another place. God's will is equally hidden in all of creation, equally revealed in every mitzvah, and it's infinite. So you can't say, well, I got 10 pounds of will here and only an ounce of will there, right? God's will is God's will. It's infinite. Nevertheless, aval pichen ha'he'ara eina shaveh bivchinat tzimtzum v'hitpashtut.
Nevertheless, the illumination of the supernal will in one's soul is different in terms of its contraction and expansion.
All right, so let's think of that as we said. Our window can contract, our window can expand. That's letting the light in. So when the kavanah is there, now I've blown my window up, so now it's a nice big sunlit room. And that's another image that often these masters would bring, that God wants us to create a home, and the mitzvah creates the home, but God wants a beautiful sunlit home with light streaming in, not a dim home, God forbid. So it's the Kavanah that makes the home we've created with the mitzvah a beautiful sunlit home like God will enjoy. Then we have a note, let's do it. Susan, are you reading? Yeah.
It is also explained that Etz Chaim, Kavanah in mitzvot and in Torah study is on the level of light, while the body, in other words, performance of the mitzvot, is the level and category of vessels.
And Susan, let's you and I do the whole note. Shehem bechinat tzimtzum she'al yedei tzimtzum ha'or nithavu hakelim keyadua liodeichen.
These vessels represent contraction, for it is through contraction of the light that the vessels came into being, as it is known to the students of the Kabbalah.
All right, so here, from another perspective, what's the difference between light and vessel is a question of contraction, so much so that the vessels, their whole reality, the reason they appeared is because the light contracted. And the light contracting is what formed the vessels, like a snail's shell, as the Alter Rebbe explains elsewhere. So again, the Kavanah and the mitzvah is light and a vessel, and the vessel is much more contracted, so much so that it actually, all it is contracted light. That's it. That's its identity. And now we're going to go to a new section of this chapter where the Alter Rebbe, like the 4 cups of our Tu B'Shvat Seder, the Alter Rebbe shows how the same way the world is divided into 4 categories of existing things, of objects, the mitzvot that we can do are also divided into 4 categories because everything flows out of these 4 names of God's name. So I'm going to take you through the 4 categories so you see which mitzvah applies to which category, and then we'll go inside. Let me share my screen once again. Zoom, why are you so clunky to share screens? Seeing this? All right. So we have 4 levels of mitzvot that the Alter Rebbe is going to describe. And we also have 4 categories of beings, things that exist, right? 4 categories of reality. So I want to explain to you which corresponds to which, what the 4 are. So as we go through, you'll have the model clear in your mind. We've talked about the 4 categories of reality. There's the category of inanimate. So whether that is a mountain or an asteroid, or whether it's a pebble, whether it's a dead branch lying on the ground, any inanimate object is called domem, silent. Silent. So that's the whole inanimate world. The second is plants, tzomeach, and tzomeach means growing. So anything that it's alive, but its main property in terms of its life force is that it grows. That's a plant. That's tzomeach, right? I know you have these walking plants somewhere, but basically they're growing. Third category is chai, animals. Look at that cute little baby sheep, right? So cute. So any living thing that's a higher category of life that has now a cat, it has a personality, it has emotions, it has intellect, right? I mean, animals know where to run, where to find food, but not the level of the 4th category, which is us, which is medaber, humans. And beautiful that the medaber level is the very opposite of the domem level. Medaber means speaker, and we really are in many ways distinguished by having such an abstract language, which it seems like when a dog makes sounds, it's not quite as abstract. It doesn't have grammar. And then the opposite is domem. Inanimate is called silent. So really, the one end of the spectrum is defined as being the opposite of the other end. Right? Domem is inanimate because it's silent, and medaber is human because it speaks. So once again, these 4 levels, domem, inanimate, tzomeach, plant, chai, animal, and medaber, human. Now, in the next section of the chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to take us through 4 categories of mitzvahs that correspond to each of these categories. And they are, at the bottom, the action mitzvahs, so that's a real physical action mitzvah, like someone building a sukkah right here with your hands, something that you actually physically have to do, you know, taking up a lulav and etrog, spinning a gragger, action mitzvahs. And then part two of the bottom two is mitzvahs done with speech and thought. Mitzvahs done with speech and thought. So now I'm still moving my lips, I'm still using my physical brain, but it's a little more spiritual when I'm saying a blessing or I'm, you know, reciting words of Torah. It's a more spiritual act. But what defines these two first categories is they're done just with a basic awareness, but not with kavanah. So if I do a physical mitzvah without kavanah, even though it creates a home for God, I've done a mitzvah, that's a mitzvah on the level of an inanimate object. It's like a rock, right? It's here in the world, it's created a home, but it's the first and most basic level where I'm not engaged in an emotional way. I'm just doing it by rote. And if I'm learning Torah for 10 hours and the last hour I'm just forcing myself to go through and I'm just like thinking about something else and I'm not doing it with any kavanah, that also would be the second level. That would be the tzomeach, or the plant level, where I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm creating a home for God, but it doesn't have that level of love and awe, and so it's on the level of plant. It's not gone up to the level of animal. The top two are different, an upper category, and they both correspond to the amount of kavanah that now I do put into a mitzvah. So whereas the domem, inanimate, and the speech and thought mitzvahs, the tzomeach, that's mitzvahs done without kavanah. Now, as soon as I add kavanah, I jump up to the level of either innate kavanah, which we'll learn what that means. That's using the love and awe that's already there hidden within me. We'll review it. Or the highest level, medaber, is when I have kavanah that I've actually generated myself with my own meditation. And that's what we're working on in this class, primarily is using the long, short path to generate through my intellectual contemplation emotions that are mine to apply when it's appropriate. So that was a little complicated sounding, but basically, going back, we got 4 categories of reality: inanimate, plant, animal, and human. They correspond to physical mitzvahs done without kavanah, or speech and thought mitzvahs done without kavanah. And then the top 2 correspond to the kavanah that I do now infuse, but an innate kavanah that I didn't create myself, or at the very top, intellectual kavanah that I did generate through meditation. And that's the highest quality of a mitzvah I can do, is a mitzvah, hi Joyce, let me let you in, is a mitzvah that is infused with kavanah that I created myself through my own awareness of the relationship with God and God's greatness and divine concepts. Any questions about this before we jump in? Is that sort of clear, the 4 categories? Yeah, okay. Let's see how the Alter Rebbe describes it. Let me look. Okay, no comments online, so thanks for following us. V'nechleket gam ken le'arba madregot. Who are we at?
Does Paula want to read?
Paula, would you like to read the next very bottom of 542 if you want to unmute? There you go.
They too, the mitzvot and their kavanah, are differentiated into 4 levels.
All right, so as we said, and Paula, why don't you go on? Ki guf ha-mitzvot atzman mamash, hen beit madregot, shehen mitzvot masiot mamash.
For the body of the mitzvot themselves comprises 2 levels, namely mitzvot consisting of real action as opposed to speech, which is merely regarded as action.
Right, so the body, as opposed to the soul, the mitzvah as opposed to the kavanah, divides into 2. One which is physical mitzvot, and the other is as we'll see, umitzvot hatliyot bedibur machashava kmo Talmud Torah ukriyat shema utfila uvirkat hamazon ushar brachot. Go ahead, Joyce.
Oh, I'm not ready. I'm sorry.
Oh,
And
okay, yeah, we're on.
And mitzvot performed with speech and thought, such as Torah study, reciting the Shema, praying, saying the blessing after meals, and other blessings. Both these levels, action and thought and speech, are subdivisions of the category of the body of mitzvot.
Right, so the Alter Rebbe said a mitzvah, the physical mitzvah is the body, but the kavanah is the soul. So the body, the physical mitzvah, is divided into physical and thought and speech. Joyce, do you want to jump in now?
No, I'm still looking for the.
Okay. Let me know when you're on the page there. I'm going to mute you so there's no background noise. Uchavanat hamitzvot ledavka bo yiparech shehi kinshama laguf.
The kavanah of mitzvot, that is one's intention to attach oneself to God by performing the mitzvah. This, the kavanah, being like a soul for the body of the mitzvah.
Why don't you go one more? Nechleket gam ken lishte madregot kmo shte madregot haneshama shehen baguf hachumri shehen chai umedaber.
Is likewise divided into two levels, corresponding to the two levels of soul found in material bodies, namely in animals and in man.
And look how the Alter Rebbe defined kavanah. I know in Jewish spiritual circles, a lot of time kavanah has been equated with sort of expanded consciousness, which is a beautiful, pleasurable thing, having expanded consciousness. I get it. And so we think of it as like a highly spiritualized state, kavanah. It's really mysterious. Joyce, we're on page 543. But here, he describes kavanah very much as a relationship, right? What's the kavanah? What's this emotional intention that I'm putting in the mitzvah that's like a soul? It's that I want to attach myself to God by doing the mitzvah. I want to have a relationship, want to have a connection, right? And so when like I said, when your grandkids call and say, "Hi, Grandma, hi, Grandpa, I just wanted to hear your voice. We love you," right? That's it, right? They want to connect, and that's the whole world is there. It's amazing, right? Like, do I need more than that? And so our kavanah is more like a relationship, and that God gets so much nachas when we want to connect to God and pick up the phone, which is the mitzvah or learning, because we want to connect to God. And the more I feel that, the more kavanah the mitzvah has. And it's possible that our sense that kavanah has to be some cosmic expanded awareness. That's right, 543. That has to be some cosmic expanded awareness. That's kind of been imported from other modalities of meditation. Because, like I said earlier, if your emotions are there, the rest of your soul is integrated exactly the way it's supposed to be. I don't have to necessarily have my stable consciousness pushed up to the level of bria, to be giving God nachas and to be having a profound kavanah, and that everything I'm fulfilling everything I'm supposed to be fulfilling as a Jew. Ki mi shedato yafa ledat et Hashem ulhitbonen bigdulato yiparech.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
The first level is that of a person discerning enough to know God and to reflect on his greatness and to create out of his understanding a lofty fear in his mind and a love of God in the right part of his heart, the seat of the divine soul's emotions.
So now we're going back. If you've been with us over the past couple years, we're really going back now to the long short path, which we practice when we can at the end of classes. I hope most people learning practice it on a regular basis. And that is the system of meditation where I clear my mind, I introduce a divine concept, and then I let that concept fill my mind rather than empty my mind. And by doing that, I now generate emotions of love and awe, as we said, that will elevate my mitzvahs. So that we learned that back in chapters 16 and 17. And that's that top level of medaber. When I have a love of something, and that love of the thing stems from my intellectual appreciation of that thing, now that love, it's attached to a higher world. Even though it's emotions, which live really in the world of Yetzirah, the second spiritual world, because it comes from an intellectual appreciation. Its seed is an intellectual appreciation. That's what generated it. Really, its true home is now in the world of Bria, even though it's an emotion. So emotions that I generate through my intellect, they have the ability to actually bring my mitzvahs to a higher level. That's why they're on the fourth category of medaber. That's the truest spiritual expression of a human, is to recognize the beauty of the infinite and the beauty of right and wrong, and now to steer even my animal soul emotions to appreciate what's right and wrong and what's really true and what's really beautiful. And that's amazing, because that's absolutely that's in many ways the gift that humanity brings to the world, is that we have conscious awareness of abstract truths and right and wrong. It's not just automatic. We're not, although we do have instincts, which comes next. So that's that fourth level. If I've meditated on a divine concept and now I have a feeling about it, and I bring that feeling to bear when performing the mitzvah, that is a mitzvah with the fourth level of medaber level kavanah, human level kavanah. Al yedei kiyum haTorah v'mitzvot shehen hamshachat v'he'arat or Ein Sof Baruch Hu al nafsho ledavkavo. Okay, so Eleanor, why don't you, Dan's next. Why don't you go by fulfilling?
You know, I've lost my place here. Page 544.
544,
right?
second chunk, by fulfilling.
So that the soul thirsts for God, seeking to cleave to him by fulfilling the Torah and mitzvot, which are the extension and illumination of the Ein Sof light upon one's soul, by which one may cleave to him.
And it's true about anything. If I think about golf day and night, I'm going to love golf. If I think about my wife day and night and how wonderful she is, that will create feelings of respect and love for her. If I think about my kids and, how are they doing in life? Are they being educated properly? Am I being a good father to them? That's going to bring my feelings for them more to the surface and steer them in a beautiful way. Anything we decide to think about will create emotions. So we already know all these divine concepts. Now we want to think about them long enough and deep enough that I create emotions about God and Judaism. And then we go to the third level, which is now innate kavanah, and we're going to call it the hidden love. Sorry, no, we're still on medaber. Sorry, I got ahead of myself.
Cantor, could you stop a second and give us some examples of some of these different levels? For example, giving tzedakah, putting tzedakah in a box. If I do it on a rote basis, every day I put $1 in. But if I do it on a different basis, I'm putting this $1 in because I'm thinking about God. Is that the difference there? Is that an example of it? Or you want to help me out here?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Exactly what you described. So your first example, I do it every day. I get up, I have my coffee, I put my $1 in the box, and off I go to work. Okay, I know it's tzedakah. I've made a home for God there, beautiful. But if it was I had no more emotional engagement in putting the $1 in as I did in starting my car to go to work. It was just part of my routine. Now that's the level of domim. It's a mitzvah like an inanimate object, just the body's there, and I haven't brought the soul in.
Okay.
Right? Yes. Now if I wake up and I spend 5 minutes thinking about how tzedakah is really concludes all of the physical mitzvahs and how it takes everything that I've done, all my energy, and elevates it. And I think about the meaning and how close it brings me to God, how much nachas it brings God. And now I've got myself worked up. I'm dancing as I put in my $1 into my tzedakah box. Still $1, right? It's not going to buy anybody any more clothing. It's not going to, buy any more books for Temple Israel. But I've given that mitzvah a soul, and we'll parse between the two types of kavanah. But the first one we've learned about, if it's through my intellectual meditation that I got engaged and enthused, now I've raised that mitzvah up to the level of medaber, because I'm doing it with real gusto and love and respect. So now, yeah, that's adding a soul to the body of the mitzvah, and that soul is at the level of medaber. It's a human level soul. So your example is perfect. Does that clarify? No? No, all that still I get this. What am I missing? What's the gray area?
No, it's fine. But so every mitzvah then, any mitzvah that you're talking about, anything from studying Torah to giving $1 in a tzedakah to building a sukkah, every mitzvah you do can be on any one of those 4 levels.
Yes, although if you're doing a mitzvah without kavanah, now you distinguish between pure action mitzvahs and mitzvahs that involve speech and thought, which are intrinsically just a little more spiritual anyways. So the Alter Rebbe did say, when you're talking about just the body, putting $1 in tzedakah box or building a sukkah, that's the level of inanimate if it's done without kavanah. But saying a blessing by rote, that's at the level of plant, because it's already got a little bit of more spiritual light in it because it's speech or thought. So that's the one piece I'd add to what you just said.
Okay.
Do I get a nod now, or is it still kind of okay? Thumbs up. Good. You know how to do that on Zoom, right? You got reactions. You can give me the Zoom thumbs up right there. All right. Yes.
Is this an example like today for Tu B'Shvat? I was going to bring food to my kids. When I talked to them yesterday, I was just going to get them chicken dinners. Well, but for yesterday, but for today, I'm bringing them a Tu B'Shvat plate along with other stuff. So is that a different kind of mitzvah? I should say a prayer over it too, I guess, right?
Yeah, so there you have an example. You're bringing a plate of species, maybe of pomegranates and olives, maybe even from Israel, who knows, right? You're bringing fruit for Tu B'Shvat and produce that we celebrate. So that's a physical mitzvah. So already that's a home for God. Boom. Reality is justified, and that's the point of reality. But now the question is, are you doing it? You look like you're excited when I see you talking about it. I see a spark in your eye. I see enthusiasm. So that love you have putting it together and bringing it, that's now the soul elevating it. And by the way, if you're also saying a blessing when you're doing it, maybe it's a Borei Priya Eitz, now you've elevated as well because you're involving Tzomeach, right? And you may add Kavanah to that as well because you're saying the blessing with enthusiasm. So yes, every mitzvah that you could think of doing, whether it's physical or speech, falls under this category. And once we're doing it, now it's up to us how much soul we're going to add to it, right? So in other words, when you bring the plate and you say the blessing and you do it with kavanah, now it becomes soul food, right?
It doesn't matter when the blessing is said. Is it like in the car outside their door when I drop it? It doesn't really matter.
I'm not catching everything you're saying, but the blessing you say before you eat it, that's kind of that'd be the natural time to say it. Yeah. But whenever you're saying a blessing, now that blessing could have more or less kavanah. So that's the dynamic we're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's do just a couple more before we sit and meditate. Yeah. When he studies
Torah and fulfills the mitzvah, it is with this kavanah, and likewise when he prays and recites blessing, it is with this kavanah of cleaving to God, whose greatness he has come to understand.
Right, so this is again, we're talking about the highest level of kavanah that I've generated through intellectual appreciation and meditation. Hare kavanah zo al derech mashal kmo nishmat hamedaber shehu ba'al sechel uvchira uvedat yedaber.
Such kavanah is analogous to the soul of a human being who possesses intelligence and freedom of choice and who speaks with wisdom, for such kavanah is likewise based on intellect and choice. So
let's pick up next week, 544, right there we'll discuss such kavanah as analogous to the soul, hare kavanah zo, because that really is, when you think about what free choice means, that is the difference between the intellect of an animal and the intellect of a human being. It's not so much, as we'll discuss, quantity, because if that were so, there's a very, very wide difference in how clever human beings are. And you could probably find a higher order animal that actually has more sheer intellect than the lowest functioning intellectual human being. So it's not necessarily the quantity. You can't say because somebody's a super genius, they're more human than someone that is has lower intellectual capacity. They're all human. That's not what makes them human. There's another quality, and that quality, as we'll see, is that however much intellect I have, that intellect actually steers my emotions and my decisions. I can overcome my nature with my intellect. Not because I'm so smart, just because I'm human. That's the quality of a human. An animal may have a high level of intellect, but in its natural state, you will very rarely see an animal overcome and do the reverse of its nature because it has decided something else is more right. Right? That's not how animal intellect works. They can be very, a fox or a chimpanzee. They can be a parrot is as smart as a 3-year-old, I'm told, and yet a parrot is never going to, not eat that nut that's in front of it for whatever reason, because today's a fast day. That's not in the life of a parrot's intellect. So we'll talk about that next week. Let's finish with a little bit of a sit. Thanks for joining us if you're on Facebook. So this is exactly that moment, and I'll mute a few devices here. This is exactly the moment where we want to now focus on the quality of soul we're creating for any mitzvah we're going to do today. Let's come to a comfortable seated position, nice long spine, closed eyes, and now we do pay attention to our inner space. And that inner space really, in many ways, begins with the breath, so let the breath become calm and deep and long. Let's move into the 4 stages of breath that you're familiar with if you're with us. Breathing on a count of 4 in, 2, 3, 4. Let that breath stay in, 2, 3, 4. Release the breath out, 2, 3, 4. Keep the breath out, 2, 3, 4. Once again, in, 2, 3, 4. Keep the breath in, 2, 3, 4, and releasing out, 2, 3, 4, and stay there. Keeping this pattern, let your belly get in. As you breathe in, your belly expands. Stay like a happy baby as the breath stays in. And breathing out, the belly pulls up. And keep it pulled up as you stay with the breath out. And starting over again, in. Let's open up our wisdom gateway. There it is. There's where our light comes in. So much light can flood in through that point of Chachma. For anyone new, our wisdom gateway is the space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. Let that function as a gateway, as it were, allowing wisdom into your consciousness. Let's place in that wisdom gateway this concept that every mitzvah I'll do needs a soul. That soul is the kavanah I'm creating right now. So we're generating tremendous light in the form of love, tremendous light in the form of fear or awe. That will be the soul for any mitzvah, any learning that I do for the rest of the day will elevate it to higher worlds. And let that light fill your mind. More and more detail, more and more bright, bigger and bigger screen. And be aware if even now this meditation is inspiring feelings in your heart, feelings of closeness to the infinite, feelings of real reverence and respect for this opportunity of living a life of serving God. As I always say, if you're joining us in the future, feel free to hit pause and stay in this state for 5, 10, 15 minutes, allowing this meditation of a soul for your mitzvahs to flow through your entire mind. Fill it like a cup of wine to the very, very top. But in our class here, we are out of time, so please wiggle your toes and your fingers. Wonderful, everyone. Wishing you again a Chag Sameach, a wonderful Tu B'Shvat. Thanks for joining us, everyone who was on Facebook, on Zoom, in the future on YouTube. We're going to sign off of Facebook now. And as always, feel free to email Maya at temple-israel.org if you'd like to join us in our actual Zoom class. Wonderful learning with you.
Thank you, Cantor.